Welcome back. In this video, we'll explore the fascinating world of Pokémon Sun and Moon's deleted content. Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon are remembered as two of the most experimental games in the series. They brought bold changes to the familiar formula, from replacing gyms with island trials to introducing cinematic storytelling and brand new mechanics like Z-moves. But behind the final version we all played was another version, one filled with ambitious features, side quests, and hidden systems that never made it past development. These pieces of cut content range from expanded post-game facilities to entire gameplay mechanics that could have changed how we explored and battled. What's fascinating about this lost material is how much of it still lingers in the game's files: unfinished maps, unused dialogue, incomplete character models, and even bits of test code. Together, they reveal a vision for Sun and Moon that was larger and more dynamic than the one we received. In this video, we'll uncover those hidden plans, explore the features that were left behind, and imagine what Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon might have been if those ideas had come to life. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's journey through the forgotten corners of these games, the Pokémon adventures that were almost part of our story. Among the many whispers of scrapped content from Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon, few are as captivating to fans as the rumor and later confirmation through leaks of a never-before-seen flying-type Eevee evolution. Eevee, known as the Evolution Pokémon, is famous for its ability to evolve into multiple elemental forms, each tied to a specific type. By the time Sun and Moon released, players had already met 8 evolutions, ranging from the aquatic Vaporeon to the fairy-type Sylveon. Yet in the game's development phase, the design team was reportedly experimenting with a ninth, a sleek, airy form meant to embody the sky itself. This concept surfaced most notably during the massive Pokémon Sun and Moon data leaks, known informally in the community as the Terra Leak. Hidden among internal artwork and early model files were sketches and design notes for a feathered, aerodynamic Eevee form. While the leaked material was incomplete, fans pieced together enough details to imagine what might have been. This scrapped evolution had a streamlined body, lighter than any previous evolution, with delicate wing-like tufts of fur that stretched outward like stylized feathers. Its color scheme appeared to blend soft whites and pale blues, the kind of palette you might associate with clouds on a clear summer day. What's particularly interesting about this flying-type evolution is how it might have worked mechanically. Every evolution to date has evolved through a specific method: elemental stones, time of day, location-based triggers, or friendship combined with learning a special move. For this airborne form, internal notes hinted at a new evolution item, something called a skystone. This would have been a rare object, obtainable only in specific high-altitude areas of Alola, potentially near the summit of Mount Lanakila or atop other windy, elevated routes. The competitive possibilities of such a Pokémon were intriguing. A flying-type evolution could have provided an interesting mix of speed and special attack, potentially rivaling Jolteon's swiftness, but with a more aerial-inspired move pool. Moves like Air Slash, Tailwind, and Hurricane were almost certainly in consideration, and given Evolution's tendency to specialize, this new form might have become a strong niche choice for players wanting both elegance and offensive capability. As for why it was cut, we can only speculate. Some sources close to the leaks suggested that the design bore too much resemblance to popular fan-made creations, which could have caused issues for Game Freak. Others believe that the decision was more strategic. Perhaps the developers wanted to save a flying type evolution for a future generation, where it could be the centerpiece of new content, much like Sylveon was for Generation 6. There's also the simple reality of development limitations. Every new Pokemon requires animations, balancing, integration into the Pokédex, and testing, and it's possible the team simply ran out of time to polish this one for release. Even though it never took to the skies in an official game, the flying type evolution has lived on in fan art, fan games, and speculation threads across the Pokemon community. It's a reminder of how powerful the appeal of what could have been can be. A small glimpse of an alternate Alola, where an Eevee could spread its wings and soar alongside the region's many bird Pokemon. In our next part, we'll move from a single evolution to an entire wave of regional redesigns, the Alolan forms that were planned but ultimately never made it into the final version of the game. Some of these ideas were wildly creative, and others might have even rivaled the most popular Alolan forms we did get. One of the most celebrated features introduced in Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon was the concept of regional variants, familiar Pokémon redesigned to match the environment, culture, and ecosystem of the Alola region. These Alolan forms were not just palette swaps or minor tweaks. They often came with completely new typings, abilities, and lore explanations for why they evolved differently from their mainland counterparts. Alolan Vulpix, for example, adapted to snowy mountain peaks and became an ice type. Alolan Marowak took on a ghost and fire typing after developing a spiritual, flame-wielding fighting style. This feature quickly became a fan favorite, and its success has since inspired regional forms in later generations. However, what players saw in the final game was just a portion of what Game Freak initially planned. Thanks to concept art leaks, early interviews, and data-mined material from the Sun and Moon files, we now know that several more Alolan forms were designed but never released. Each one gives us an intriguing glimpse at the what-if versions of the Alola Pokédex. One of the most surprising omissions was an Alolan Rhyhorn line. In this scrapped concept, Rhyhorn would have shed its usual ground and rock typing in favor of becoming electric and rock type. The design sketches hinted at bright, yellow, lightning bolt-like markings running down its armored hide, suggesting that it had adapted to draw power from Alola's frequent tropical storms. This change would have also given it a unique position in competitive battles, making it resistant to certain water-type moves while packing electric coverage to deal with flying types. Why this idea was abandoned is uncertain. Perhaps balancing an electric and rock-type Rhyperior proved too tricky, or perhaps the design didn't fully capture the desired Alolan feel. Another intriguing idea was an Alolan Seal and Dugong. In this concept, these icy sea lion Pokemon would have taken on a water and fairy typing, their designs shifting towards softer pastel blues and pearlescent accents, almost resembling mythical sea creatures. Lore-wise, they would have been revered in Alolan legend as gentle ocean guardians, appearing in calm bays during festivals. This concept might have been cut simply due to redundancy, as Alola already had strong fairy-type representation in Pokemon like Primarina, Tapu Fini, and Ribombee. Scyther also received early Alolan redesign treatment. Instead of the bug and flying typing we know, Alolan Scyther would have been bug and fairy. This form would have replaced its sharp, mantis-like aggression with a sleeker, more mystical aesthetic. The concept art suggested wing shapes inspired by tropical butterflies and ornate patterns across its exoskeleton. From a gameplay perspective, this change would have completely altered its competitive role, potentially giving it a very different moveset and niche compared to its standard form. One of the more unexpected and amusing cuts was an Alolan Snorlax reimagined as a fighting type. The leaked notes describe this version as a much more active and disciplined Snorlax, inspired by martial arts masters. Instead of lounging and sleeping, it would have stood in a steady combat stance, with a leaner build and tied-off belt-like markings around its waist. This concept would have been a humorous contrast to the famously lazy Snorlax we know, and it could have fit into the story as a rare, disciplined species only found in specific Alolan training dojos. There are also faint traces in development files of other potential Alolan forms, concepts so early that we only have hints of them in unused texture data and vague name listings. Some fans believe there were ideas for an Alolan Arcanine or an Alolan Lapras, though there's little concrete evidence to confirm these beyond speculative artwork. Ultimately, while these scrapped forms never made it into the official games, they continue to inspire fan creations, ROM hacks, and speculative discussions. In some ways, their absence makes them even more legendary, like lost artifacts from an alternate version of Alola. Mimikyu is one of the most iconic Pokémon introduced in Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon. Its tattered Pikachu disguise, paired with its shy and lonely nature, made it an instant fan favorite. According to its lore, Mimikyu wears the costume because it wants to be loved as much as Pikachu, and seeing its true form can cause intense discomfort or even harm to those who look directly at it. But what most players don't know is that during development, Mimikyu almost had a much more varied, version-exclusive gimmick that never made it into the final games. Leaked concept art from the development phase revealed that Game Freak had explored the idea of Mimikyu disguising itself as different Pokémon depending on which version of the game you owned. In Pokémon Sun, its disguise might have resembled a simplified, homemade Charizard or Solgaleo. In Pokémon Moon, it could have taken the form of a Lunala or even an Umbreon-like costume. The idea was that Mimikyu would always be imitating something beloved or revered in the region, which would make its disguise more fitting to the Alola culture and story. This would have made Mimikyu's appearance more dynamic, and given each version of the game its own unique twist on an already mysterious Pokémon. The files also suggest that these variant disguises may have had slight gameplay differences, possibly giving Mimikyu access to different exclusive moves or abilities depending on its costume. While it's not certain, some fans speculate this could have been tied to the disguise ability, maybe even changing the type of the first attack Mimikyu would unleash after being hit. Unfortunately, while it's a fascinating concept, this feature was likely cut for practical reasons. Creating, balancing, and animating multiple disguises for a single Pokémon would have significantly increased development time, and it may have distracted from Mimikyu's already well-received Pikachu disguise. Alongside Mimikyu's alternate forms, the same internal leak revealed concepts for two entirely new fossil Pokémon that never saw the light of day. Fossils have been a staple of the series since the first generation, offering prehistoric Pokémon revived through in-game science. In Alola, the final games opted to skip introducing new fossil lines altogether, but the scrapped concepts suggest this wasn't always the plan. The first of these fossils was tentatively designed as a rock and water type, a reptilian, amphibious creature inspired by ancient sea lizards. Its design had streamlined fins, suggesting incredible speed underwater, and its color palette resembled muted coral reefs, blending natural camouflage with prehistoric menace. It could have been a counterpart to Pokemon like Caracosta, representing a predator from Alola's distant oceans. The second fossil Pokemon was less complete in design, but notes indicate it may have been intended as a rock and electric type, something extremely rare among fossil Pokemon. The electric typing would have set it apart, perhaps drawing inspiration from bioluminescent prehistoric creatures or even lightning storms over ancient volcanoes. This could have tied it to Alola's theme of blending nature with elemental power. Why these fossils were cut is uncertain, but it's likely due to pacing and thematic consistency. Alola already had a heavy focus on regional variants and Ultra Beasts, and adding fossil Pokemon might have pulled focus away from these signature features. Still, it's intriguing to imagine how these creatures might have influenced Alola's competitive scene and lore. The Mimikyu variant idea, in particular, stands out because of how much personality it could have added to the games. Imagine encountering your first Mimikyu and being surprised not by a Pikachu costume, but by a clumsy Charizard or a ghostly Lunala disguise. It would have been unforgettable. Ultra Beasts were one of the most mysterious and exciting features introduced in Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon. These strange, extra-dimensional Pokémon arrived in Alola through Ultra Wormholes, bringing with them bizarre designs and powers unlike anything seen in previous generations. Each Ultra Beast felt alien, their origins tied to the strange dimension known as Ultra Space. But hidden within the files and concept art leaks of Sun and Moon is evidence of an Ultra Beast that never appeared in the final game, a creature referred to internally as Mazura. Unlike the other Ultra Beasts, whose designs were often insect-like, crystalline, or inspired by natural phenomena, Mazura stood out as something different. Based on early sketches from the leaks, Mazura appeared to have a squat, hunched posture with a bulky, armored body. Its face was covered by a featureless mask-like shell, giving it a mysterious, almost unsettling expression. Large, claw-like appendages jutted from its arms, and its coloration appeared to be a muted combination of deep purples and grays, possibly to emphasize its stealthy or defensive nature. The notes attached to Mazura's design hinted that it might have been tied to a special side story or even a movie project. Some sources speculate that Mazura was meant to debut in one of the Sun and Moon anime films, much like how Zeraora was introduced in a movie before appearing in the games. This connection could explain why its concept seemed more cinematic than gameplay focused. In terms of typing, there's no definitive answer in the leak files, but several pieces of evidence suggest Mazura may have been a rock and steel type, or possibly bug and fighting. Its armored appearance and heavy claws suggest a physically powerful Pokémon, potentially more defense-oriented than most Ultra Beasts. Its role in battle could have revolved around breaking through defenses or setting up hazards like Stealth Rock while enduring hits, something unusual for Ultra Beasts, which were generally designed as aggressive sweepers. The reason for Mazura's removal remains unknown, but there are a few likely possibilities. One theory is that the developers simply felt they had enough Ultra Beasts for the story and didn't want to overcomplicate Ultra Space encounters. Another theory is that because Mazura may have been tied to an outside media project, its inclusion in the main games might have been postponed and eventually scrapped when those plans changed. For fans, Mazura has become something of a ghost in Pokémon history. Unlike other scrapped Pokémon that resemble existing creatures, Mazura's design is so unusual that it's hard to draw direct comparisons. This has fueled endless fan art, speculation, and even unofficial revival mods where dedicated players recreate it in ROM hacks. While it may never appear in an official game, its existence in the leaked materials ensures that it will always remain part of the hidden lore of Sun and Moon. In our next part, we'll shift focus from individual Pokemon designs to ambitious, large-scale gameplay features, beginning with the concept of Guardians and the mysterious Miracle Stones, a scrapped system that could have rivaled Z-moves in importance. During the development of Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon, Game Freak was experimenting with multiple big gameplay mechanics to serve as Alola's central battle gimmick. In the final release, that role went to Z-moves, powerful one-use per battle attacks activated by a Z-crystal worn on the player's Z-ring. But buried in the internal design notes from the Terra leak and hinted at in some early development builds is evidence of an entirely different mechanic that could have taken center stage: the Guardians and Miracle Stone system. The idea seemed to blend elements of Mega Evolution, Z-moves, and even the totem Pokemon encounters. Instead of collecting Z-crystals, players would search for rare items called Miracle Stones, hidden across the Alola region. Each stone was tied to a specific Guardian Pokemon, not just the 4 Guardian deities we know in the final game: Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, Tapu Finiti, but an expanded roster of at least a dozen legendary or mythical tier Pokemon that would serve as protectors of various islands, towns, or natural landmarks. When the player obtained a Miracle Stone, it could be equipped to a compatible Pokemon, unlocking a temporary transformation visually similar to Mega Evolution that boosted its stats and sometimes altered its typing. For example, leaked balancing notes describe a concept where a Miracle Stone tied to volcanic energy could be equipped to a fire-type Pokemon like Arcanine, giving it a molten armor design and changing one of its abilities. This transformation would last for the duration of the battle, but could only be used once, making it a strategic choice. Interestingly, early dialogue drafts suggest that the Miracle Stones would have been tied deeply into the game's story. Kahunas and trial captains would speak of them as sacred artifacts passed down through generations, each linked to the history and mythology of Alola. The Guardians themselves might have appeared in the overworld to aid the player in specific scripted events, much like how Tapu Koko saves the protagonist early in the final version. There's even evidence in unused map data of special Guardian arenas, large circular battlefields that don't match any existing location in the final game, possibly intended for these unique encounters. Why was this ambitious system cut? Most likely, it was a matter of complexity. By the time Sun and Moon were nearing completion, Game Freak already had to balance hundreds of Pokemon for competitive play, design new regional forms, and create the Ultra Beast roster, adding an entire new transformation mechanic with unique animations, stat adjustments, and lore integration may have been too much to finish in time for release. Instead, the Miracle Stones were replaced with the more streamlined Z-move system, which required fewer new models and animations, but still gave Alola its own distinct battle identity. Still, the concept of Guardians and Miracle Stones is fascinating to imagine. If it had been implemented, Sun and Moon might have been remembered as the generation that introduced both regional forms and a second permanent battle transformation alongside Mega Evolution. Fans continue to speculate about whether elements of this idea might someday be revived in a future game, perhaps blended with existing mechanics in a new form. One of the defining features of Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon was the replacement of the traditional gym system with island trials. Instead of fighting through a series of gyms and earning badges, players faced themed challenges hosted by trial captains, followed by battles against totem Pokémon. This was a refreshing change for many, as it tied gameplay more closely to Alola's culture and story. But hidden deep within the early design plans was evidence that a completely different side quest would have allowed players to bring gyms back to Alola and even build one of their own. The gym building quest appeared in concept documents uncovered during the Terra Leak, along with unfinished dialogue files buried in the game's code. The premise was that an NPC, possibly a former gym leader from outside of Alola, would approach the player midway through the story. This character lamented that Alola had abandoned gyms in favor of island trials, but believed the two systems could coexist. They would then invite the player to help restore a long-defunct gym somewhere on one of the islands. According to the unused dialogue, the quest would have started with the player helping to repair and customize the gym building. There were references to choosing the gym's type specialty, fire, water, grass, etc., selecting decorations, and even hiring NPC trainers to serve as gym trainers. Each trainer would use a team suited to the chosen type, and as the quest progressed, the gym would grow in popularity, attracting stronger challengers. One of the most exciting parts of the cut content was the defense mechanic. After completing the gym setup, the player would occasionally receive notices that a challenger had arrived. Returning to the gym, the player could battle this challenger in a format similar to a traditional gym leader fight. Winning would increase the gym's reputation, while losing would slightly lower it. Maintaining a high reputation could lead to rewards such as rare TMs, special held items, and even appearances by well-known trainers from other regions. There's also evidence that this side quest could have included cross-regional cameos. One particularly intriguing piece of unused dialogue has an NPC mentioning that a leader from Kanto has come to see how you run things here, which many fans interpret as a potential appearance by Misty, Brock, or even Lieutenant Surge. This would have been an incredible nod to longtime fans and a fun way to bridge generations. Why was the gym building quest scrapped? The most likely explanation is that it conflicted with the main narrative direction. Sun and Moon were meant to break away from the traditional gym format, focusing entirely on Alola's island trials as a defining feature. Introducing gyms even as a side quest may have risked diluting that focus. Additionally, designing a customizable gym system with multiple trainer rosters, decorative options, and potential cameos would have required significant development resources. Still, the concept is beloved among fans who learned of it through the leaks. Many have recreated the idea in fan games and ROM hacks, letting players finally experience what it might have been like to run their own Alolan gym. It's one of those scrapped features that feels like it could resurface in a future mainline game or spin-off, especially since Pokémon has never fully explored a gym leader simulator concept in official releases. Among the many scrapped ideas found in Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon's development files, few stand out as much as the mysterious Survival Island feature. Buried in unused map data and supported by snippets of internal documentation, this planned mode appeared to be a completely optional post-game challenge that would have pushed players' skills, creativity, and resource management to the limit. From what has been pieced together, Survival Island was designed as a large, self contained area separate from the main Alola map. It would have been accessed only after completing the main story, most likely by speaking to a special NPC at a harbor. This NPC would mention a remote island far off the coast where trainers tested themselves by surviving under harsh conditions with minimal supplies. Accepting the challenge would have transported the player to the island, but here's the twist. You couldn't bring your full team or items with you. Instead, the mode would have started you with a single low-level Pokémon, either chosen from a small pool of starter options or assigned randomly. Your inventory would be completely wiped except for basic healing items, and you would have to catch, train, and survive using only what you could find on the island. This would have created a gameplay loop similar to a roguelike, battling wild Pokémon for resources, scavenging for rare berries and held items, and exploring dangerous areas to find TMs, evolution stones, and other key tools. The map data suggests that the island was split into multiple biomes: a dense jungle, a rocky volcanic ridge, a windswept beach, and even a mysterious cave system. Each biome appeared to have unique encounters and environmental hazards. For example, the volcanic ridge might have dealt chip damage to your Pokémon from extreme heat unless you carried certain protective items, while the cave system might have required navigating in darkness with limited visibility. The ultimate goal of Survival Island seems to have been to defeat a series of powerful boss trainers stationed in different parts of the island. These trainers may have used specially trained Pokémon with unusual movesets, forcing players to think strategically. Once all boss trainers were defeated, you could face the island champion, an NPC, whose team reportedly scaled to match the strength of your own, ensuring the battle was always challenging. Why was Survival Island cut? While no official explanation exists, it's easy to see how the scope might have been too ambitious. Creating an entirely separate progression system, balancing it for all players, and developing unique maps and mechanics would have been a huge undertaking, especially so late in development. It's also possible that the concept was considered too different from the main series' core gameplay loop, which tends to avoid survival mechanics in favor of steady progression. Even so, fans have speculated for years about how much fun this mode could have been. It would have been an opportunity for Game Freak to experiment with mechanics like limited resources, permadeath, or dynamic difficulty, scaling in a mainline Pokémon game, ideas that many spin-offs, like Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, have explored, but the main series has largely avoided. Some fan-made ROM hacks have even attempted to recreate Survival Island based on the leaked map layout, allowing curious players to experience a taste of what could have been. Among the many pieces of content that never made it into Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon, one of the most fascinating is something fans now call Survival Island, a post-game challenge unlike anything seen in the mainline series before. While the final games already broke tradition with their island trials, Survival Island would have been an even greater departure, blending elements of roguelike games, resource management, and open-ended exploration into a single, intense adventure. The first hints of this feature came from the massive Sun and Moon data leaks, nicknamed the Terra Leak, in which fans discovered unused map data, incomplete scripts, and concept notes describing an isolated location off the coast of Alola. This area wasn't connected to the standard overworld map and had its own set of encounter tables, weather patterns, and NPC placements. The scattered clues painted a picture of a completely optional, high difficulty mode designed for players who had already beaten the main story and were ready for something different. In this planned feature, players would have traveled to the island via a special NPC located at a secluded dock, possibly in Hau'oli City or Konokoni City. Speaking to them after becoming champion would have triggered a short cutscene explaining the island's purpose. It was a legendary training ground where only the most resourceful trainers could survive. Once you agreed to the challenge, your screen would fade to black, and you would find yourself on a rugged, untamed shore with almost nothing in your possession. The biggest twist? You couldn't bring your full team or your usual stockpile of items. According to the leak notes, Survival Island would strip the player down to a single, low-level Pokémon. Some versions of the plan suggest you could choose from a small pool of starter-like options, while others hint it might be completely random for an extra layer of difficulty. Your bag would be emptied except for a few essential healing items like basic potions, and the rest of your progress would depend entirely on what you could find, catch, and craft while exploring the island. The island itself appeared to be divided into multiple biomes, each with unique hazards and Pokémon encounters. The tropical jungle was dense and winding, filled with grass and bug types, but also home to rare berries that could heal status conditions. The volcanic ridge was harsh and dangerous, with fire-type Pokémon prowling the rocky slopes. Early design notes mention that certain tiles here might inflict passive damage to your party unless you found protective gear or a Pokémon with an ability like Flash Fire. The beach and coastal cliffs hosted water and flying types, and scattered along the sand were hidden items washed up from the sea, anything from healing supplies to battle-enhancing held items. Finally, the cave system offered both risk and reward, housing strong rock and dark types in pitch-black corridors that required lighting items or moves like Flash to navigate effectively. The core loop of Survival Island would have been about risk management. Do you push deeper into a biome with your weakened team, hoping to find better items, or retreat to a safer area to train and heal? Wild Pokémon battles would be a crucial source of experience and resources, but they also risked draining your already limited healing supplies. Capturing new Pokémon was possible, but Pokéballs would be scarce, making each capture attempt a calculated gamble. The challenge wouldn't just be environmental. The island was also home to a set of boss trainers. Notes from the leaked files suggest there would have been at least 4 of these formidable opponents, each stationed in a different biome. These boss trainers were said to have hand-picked teams that broke the usual AI patterns, using clever strategies and items to pressure the player. They may have also dropped key rewards, such as evolution stones or high-tier TMs, encouraging you to seek them out even if your team wasn't fully ready. Once all the boss trainers were defeated, you could challenge the island champion, the final test of Survival Island. This battle was particularly interesting because the champion's team would scale to match the highest level Pokémon in your party, ensuring it was always a tough fight, no matter how much you had trained. This scaling system would have kept the challenge fair, while preventing over-leveling from making the mode too easy. Why was Survival Island cut from the final release? The most likely reason is development scope. By the time Sun and Moon were nearing completion, the team was already juggling a huge roster of new features, regional variants, Z-moves, Ultra Beasts, and a story-heavy campaign. Building an entirely separate, self-contained mode with unique maps, encounters, and progression systems would have required months of additional work. It's also possible that the concept was considered too far removed from the mainline formula, potentially confusing casual players who preferred the traditional flow of Pokemon gameplay. Even though it never appeared officially, Survival Island remains one of the most beloved what if scenarios among fans. The idea of being dropped into a harsh, unfamiliar environment and having to scrape together a new team from scratch taps into the appeal of Nuzlocke runs, but with an official, structured framework. Fan-made ROM hacks have already attempted to recreate the mode, using the leaked map layout and encounter data to bring the concept to life for curious players. If it had been included, Survival Island might have been remembered as one of the most challenging and unique post-game modes in Pokemon history, a rare example of the series leaning into survival and resource management mechanics. It's the kind of feature that, even today, feels like it could make a comeback in a future mainline title, or perhaps a dedicated spin-off. When you think of Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon, your mind probably jumps to the bright tropical aesthetic of the Alola region, the unique island trials, or the strange otherworldly Ultra Beasts. What you probably don't think about is giant mechanical Pokemon. And yet, hidden in the early development ideas for the games was a scrapped feature known by fans as Mecha Pokemon Battles, a concept that could have added a surprising and almost sci-fi twist to the series. The first evidence of Mecha Pokemon comes from unused 3D models, texture files, and naming references buried deep in the Sun and Moon game data. These assets suggested the existence of robotic versions of several Pokemon, including a metallic Charizard, a steel-plated Gyarados, and a robotic Metagross that looked even more machine-like than its usual form. Each of these models appeared in a low-poly, untextured state, as though they were created early on and then abandoned before full development. Alongside these files were references to Mecha Battle Mode and Synthetic Pokemon Project, hinting at some kind of dedicated game mechanic involving these mechanical creatures. From the scraps of information available, the idea behind Mecha Pokemon seemed to involve battling against robot duplicates of real Pokemon, possibly as part of a special side quest or post-game challenge. The concept art and code snippets suggest these mechanical versions weren't just reskins. They were intended to have unique stats, resistances, and even custom moves that set them apart from their organic counterparts. For example, Mecha Charizard may have been immune to burn damage, while Mecha Gyarados might have resisted electric-type attacks despite its water and flying typing. One of the most intriguing parts of this cut concept was how it tied into the game's world building. There's evidence in unused dialogue that points to an organization, possibly a division of the Ether Foundation, experimenting with creating mechanical Pokemon as a way to study battling without risking harm to living creatures. Some lines suggest that these mecha versions were also intended to be used as training simulators for up-and-coming trainers, allowing them to face incredibly strong opponents in a controlled environment. If true, this would have been an interesting moral counterpoint to the main story's themes about the relationship between humans and Pokemon. The mecha battles themselves were likely designed to be high-difficulty encounters. Unused AI scripts indicate that these robotic Pokemon would use unusually aggressive strategies, like opening with stat-boosting moves and chaining them into powerful finishers tactics normally reserved for boss fights. Some mecha variants also seem to have fixed held items, such as a synthetic orb that functioned like a life orb, but with a higher power boost and no recoil damage. These advantages would have made the fights particularly challenging especially if you weren't prepared for their altered typing or immunities. Another interesting discovery was the existence of unused arena models labeled Synthetic Dome and Mechanical Plaza. These environments didn't match any location in the final game and featured clean, metallic platforms surrounded by glowing panels and machinery, a stark contrast to Alola's lush natural landscapes. It's easy to imagine how these arenas might have been used for mecha Pokemon battles, further reinforcing the feeling that you were stepping into a cutting-edge research facility. Why was this feature scrapped? While there's no definitive answer, it's likely a combination of time constraints and thematic fit. The mecha Pokemon concept, while visually striking, may have felt out of place in a region so rooted in nature, tradition, and cultural history. It's also possible that the development team decided to focus more on Ultra Beasts as Alola's otherworldly opponents, leaving no room for an entirely separate category of mechanical challengers. Even so, the concept lives on in fan projects and speculation. Some ROM hack creators have reintroduced the idea, designing custom sprites and battle mechanics for mecha Pokemon encounters. Fans have also pointed out that certain elements of the idea were loosely echoed in later games. For example, Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield's Battle Tower uses high-tech battle arenas, and Pokémon Legends, Arceus introduced noble Pokémon with special battle mechanics, but a full-fledged robotic opponent system has never returned in official games. If it had been completed, mecha Pokemon battles could have provided a unique change of pace in Sun and Moon, offering a more futuristic counterpoint to Alola's island charm. It might have even expanded into multiplayer battles, with players facing off against waves of increasingly tough mecha teams in an arcade-like endurance mode. Given the popularity of mecha designs in anime and gaming, there's a good chance it would have become a fan-favorite feature. Of all the unusual and experimental features uncovered in the Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon development leaks, one of the most charming and downright imaginative was something fans now call Mini Pokémon Mode. Unlike more battle-focused concepts, such as Mecha Pokémon, Mini Pokémon Mode would have been both a gameplay mechanic and a visual treat, fundamentally changing the way players experienced certain areas of the game. The earliest evidence of this feature came from unused animations, reduced-scale Pokémon models, and terrain collision data that didn't match any existing map in the final game. Developers often create miniature versions of character models for technical purposes, such as for background props or UI elements. But these weren't just simplified placeholders. They were fully animated, battle-ready versions of dozens of Pokémon, complete with adjusted proportions and exaggerated features that made them look cuter and more stylized when shrunk down. Based on internal references in the leaked files, Mini Pokémon Mode would have allowed players to temporarily shrink one or more of their Pokémon to a fraction of their normal size, small enough to fit inside tiny spaces, crawl through special passageways, or interact with environmental elements that were otherwise inaccessible. This wasn't just cosmetic. The scaled-down Pokémon could encounter miniature versions of the environment's hazards and enemies, essentially creating a level within a level in certain routes and towns. The most likely in-game explanation for this shrinking mechanic would have tied into Alola's unique lore. Unused NPC dialogue suggests that certain trial captains were experimenting with a special crystal that emitted a mysterious energy capable of altering a Pokémon's size. The crystals might have been rewards for completing particular side quests, allowing the player to activate mini mode on compatible Pokemon outside of battle. There was even a cut script where a captain hints that the energy came from Ultra Space, adding a layer of intrigue to the origin of the power. From a gameplay standpoint, the possibilities were surprisingly broad. Imagine sending a shrunken Pikachu scurrying into a mouse-sized tunnel to retrieve a rare item, or guiding a tiny Rowlet through the dense undergrowth of a miniature forest path. There's evidence that at least a few of these areas were designed with puzzles in mind, such as navigating moving platforms or avoiding obstacles that would be trivial at normal size but became dangerous when you were only a few inches tall. One set of unused collision data shows oversized versions of everyday items, giant leaves, towering blades of grass, and pebbles as big as boulders, suggesting that the player would truly feel the shift in perspective. Mini Pokemon mode would have also extended into battles. The leaks revealed placeholder battle arenas designed for small-scale fights, with miniature versions of Pokemon facing off in environments like a picnic table, a sandbox, or the interior of a dollhouse-like building. These weren't just for fun. The smaller size could have impacted mechanics. Some Pokemon might have had altered speed or evasiveness stats while miniaturized, making certain strategies more effective in these battles than in standard encounters. There are even hints in the data that moves might have been rescaled for comedic or exaggerated effect. Think of a tiny Charmander belting out a flamethrower that looks huge compared to its shrunken body. There was also a potential connection to Pokémon Go. During the time Sun and Moon were in development, Game Freak was aware of how wildly popular Pokémon Go had become. Some speculate that Mini Pokémon mode might have been designed with the idea of integrating AR, augmented reality, mini battles, or challenges through events, though no official link was ever confirmed. Still, the concept's inherently cute factor seems perfect for promotional tie-ins. Why was Mini Pokemon mode scrapped? Like many of the most ambitious cut features from Sun and Moon, it may have simply been too resource-intensive to finish. Designing miniaturized Pokemon models for the entire regional Pokédex, creating unique areas and puzzles, and balancing miniaturized battles would have required a huge investment of time. It's also possible that the developers worried it might feel too gimmicky compared to the already unconventional Island Trials system, or that it would clash with the game's tone in later, more dramatic story segments. Still, this feature lives on in fans' imaginations. The concept of seeing the Pokemon world from a shrunken perspective has cropped up in other games. Pokemon Snap has always played with scale in creative ways, and the Sword and Shield DLC introduced oversized environments that feel reminiscent of this scrapped mode, though without actual size-changing mechanics. Outside of Pokemon, other Nintendo franchises like The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap, have proven how engaging and whimsical a shrink-based mechanic can be when done well. If Mini Pokemon mode had made it into the final release, it could have offered a whole new way to experience Alola, a playful, visually fresh mechanic that balanced puzzle solving, exploration, and unique battles. It's easy to picture it becoming a beloved side activity for players looking to unwind between more intense story moments. And given how Pokemon fans gravitate toward features that make them feel more connected to their Pokemon partners, the idea of personally guiding a tiny version of your favorite through a big, oversized world would have been an instant hit. While Alola is often remembered for its vibrant beaches, colorful wildlife, and welcoming towns, The early development notes for Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon reveal that it almost had one of the most atmospheric and unsettling side quests in the series, something fans now refer to as the Haunted Lighthouse Quest. This scrapped storyline would have mixed eerie exploration, ghost-type Pokemon battles, and a bit of maritime folklore into a unique experience that stood apart from the rest of the game's tone. Evidence for the Haunted Lighthouse came from unused map data, incomplete NPC dialogue, and an unfinished interior tile set that didn't match any location in the final release. The lighthouse structure itself appeared in some very early concept art for Hau'oli City's harbor, though the finished version of the game ended up without any explorable lighthouse at all. In the development files, the building was placed on a rocky outcrop separated from the main city by a narrow causeway, suggesting it would have been a standalone location players could only visit under specific conditions. The quest likely began with an overheard conversation between dock workers or fishermen talking about strange lights seen at night and ships going off course. In one of the unused text strings, a dock worker says, "It's been flashing again, but no one's up there. Not for years now." Another NPC in the unused dialogue mentions hearing voices on the wind near the lighthouse after sunset, but when they checked inside, it was empty. These scraps of text helped fans piece together the intended setup. The lighthouse had been abandoned for years, yet something was causing its beacon to flicker at night, and rumors suggested it wasn't entirely empty. Visiting the lighthouse during the day in-game would have revealed little. The door might have been locked, and examining it could have triggered a message along the lines of, "It's bolted shut from the inside." The real action would have begun at night, when the causeway to the lighthouse became walkable due to the tides receding, a detail supported by unused tide-changing event scripts found in the files. At this point, you could enter and begin exploring the interior. Inside, the lighthouse was designed as a multi-floor puzzle environment. Players would climb winding staircases, search for keys, and move crates to open blocked pathways. But what made this location unique was the constant presence of subtle paranormal activity. Lights would flicker, distant footsteps could be heard, and sometimes a ghostly shape would flash across the screen for only a second. The encounter table for the area included several ghost-type Pokémon not found anywhere else in Alola at the time, such as Litwick, Misdreavus, and Shuppet, each appearing at higher levels than the surrounding wild Pokémon. Partway through the climb, the player would encounter an NPC, an old sailor with a tattered uniform who warned them to turn back. What's interesting is that in the unused dialogue, the sailor is never named, and if the player left and returned later, he wouldn't be there. Many fans believe he was meant to be revealed as a ghost himself, possibly the spirit of the lighthouse keeper who once maintained the building. His final line of dialogue, preserved in the files, reads, "I can't leave until the light guides them home." The top floor of the lighthouse held the biggest mystery. Instead of the usual rotating beacon, the light apparatus was smashed and covered in strange markings, possibly an early tie-in to the Ultra Beast lore, since some of the markings resembled portal designs. In the middle of the room was the main boss encounter of the quest, a battle against a wild Banette, or a special form of Driftblim with unique moves, such as a custom Beacon Pulse attack that dealt ghost-type damage while lowering the player's accuracy. After defeating or capturing the Pokémon, a short cutscene would play. The light would flare to life one last time, illuminating the surrounding sea, and a ship's silhouette would appear in the distance. The ghostly sailor would appear behind you, smile, and fade away. When the player returned to the harbor the next day, a fisherman would thank them, saying the ship had arrived safely during the night after being lost for days. This would end the quest and reward the player with an exclusive held item, possibly something like the Warden's Lantern, which, according to the leak text, would boost ghost-type moves when held by a Pokémon. Why did the Haunted Lighthouse quest get cut? It's possible the tone felt too spooky or supernatural for a game that leaned more heavily into bright, adventurous energy. The mechanics involving tides, multiple floors, and environmental puzzles may also have been more complex than the team had time to finalize. And while ghost-type Pokémon were still a presence in Alola's Pokédex, the developers may have wanted to keep them tied to more established haunted locations like the Thrifty Megamart or the Ruins of Abundance. Still, the idea of a location that changes depending on the time of day and that offers a self-contained mystery remains one of the most intriguing pieces of unused Sun and Moon content. Fans have even recreated the Haunted Lighthouse in fan games, using the leaked map data and dialogue to simulate the eerie nighttime adventure. If it had been included, the quest could have become one of the most memorable side stories in the series, adding a layer of mystery and atmosphere that contrasted perfectly with Alola's sunny presentation. It also could have been an excellent showcase of how the Pokémon world isn't always cheerful sometimes. It's strange, sad, and just a little bit haunted. One of the most fascinating and ambitious scrapped ideas from Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon was something that would have made Alola feel more personal, customizable, and deeply interactive: the gym building quest. Unlike anything seen in the mainline series before, this feature would have allowed players to design, decorate, and run their very own Pokémon gym, a system that could have permanently changed the way fans engaged with post-game content. The first hints of the gym building quest were uncovered in early Sun and Moon concept documents and backed up by unused text strings, incomplete overworld assets, and trainer customization code that doesn't match anything in the final games. There were references in the code to Player Gym and Island Gym Registry, as well as dialogue snippets mentioning your gym being approved by the league and ready for challengers. From these scraps, researchers pieced together a vision of a side quest where you, the player, could establish the very first traditional gym in Alola. The feature would have tied directly into Alola's unique lore. Since Sun and Moon replaced gyms with the island trials, part of the quest's story was going to revolve around reviving the gym tradition after the player became champion. According to unused dialogue, it was Professor Kukui who would approach you after the credits rolled, saying something like, "The island trials are our tradition, but the world's changing. Maybe it's time for Alola to have its first gym in years, and I want you to run it." From that point, the quest would have begun with a location selection phase. Data from the leaks show that there were at least 4 potential gym sites, each with different scenery and layouts: a seaside warehouse in Hau'oli City, a cliffside structure on Akala Island, a jungle ruin in Milamele, and a volcanic outpost on Ula Ula. Choosing a location would influence the background for battles and possibly the kinds of trainers who would show up to challenge you. Once the site was chosen, you could select your gym's type specialty. While this may have limited your eligible Pokémon for battles, it would have shaped the design and theme of the gym interior. For example, a water-type gym might feature aquarium tanks, water channels, and floating platforms, while a steel-type gym might have conveyor belts, gear motifs, and metallic walkways. The leaks revealed placeholder decoration menus that listed items like trainer banner, Pokemon statue, obstacle puzzle, and victory stage, suggesting a surprisingly deep customization system for the layout and appearance. The gym's challenge format would have been fully under your control. You could choose puzzles, trap tiles, or mini battles to make challengers earn their way to you. Unused NPC dialogue includes a line from a rival character saying, "I nearly fell into the pit you put in front of the last trainer. You're really making them work for it." This implies that the system allowed for a variety of obstacle types, similar to the elaborate puzzles seen in gyms from earlier generations. As for your gym leader duties, the plan appeared to be that you could set your own battle rules, such as the number of Pokemon per challenger, level limits, or even special conditions like only Pokemon caught in Alola. The leaks also mention league monitors, who would periodically check your gym for fairness and issue feedback. This might have been a way for the game to ensure that the player wasn't creating an unbeatable or unfair setup. The most exciting part, however, was the challenger system. Trainers from across the region would periodically appear at your gym, announced by in-game notifications. You could return to defend your title in person, leading to battles where you used your customized team under the gym's rules. Victories would earn you gym points, which could be spent on further decorations, tougher puzzle elements, or even expanding the size of your gym. Some files suggest there might have been special guest challengers, including known characters from other regions, although whether this would have been story-driven or just a fun cameo is unclear. One particularly intriguing leftover asset was a blank badge template with player badge in the file name. This points to the possibility that your gym would have issued its own unique badge to defeated challengers, perhaps one that could be designed or named by the player. In the final game, badges are absent entirely, replaced by Z crystals, so this would have been a nod to the older traditions. Why was the gym building quest cut? Most likely, it came down to scope and focus. Sun and Moon were already making a bold break from the series' formula by removing gyms in favor of island trials, and introducing a player-run gym system might have conflicted with that vision. It also would have required a huge amount of development resources to create customizable layouts, decorations, and AI behavior for challengers, all for content that would mostly be post-game. Still, the idea remains one of the most beloved what could have been concepts among Pokemon fans. The potential for personalization, replayability, and immersion was enormous. Players have long wanted more meaningful ways to shape their role in the Pokemon world beyond just battling and collecting, and this would have been a perfect step in that direction. Even today, fans create ROM hacks and fan games centered entirely on the idea of building and defending your own gym, showing just how much excitement there still is for such a feature. If it had made it into the final release, the gym building quest could have added weeks of extra playtime for dedicated fans, allowing them to fine-tune their perfect gym, challenge friends locally, or even in an ideal world, share their gym layouts online for others to take on. It's the kind of feature that might have encouraged a thriving competitive community built entirely around player creativity. One of the more surprising pieces of cut Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon content involves a location that actually did make it into the final game, Alola City's Battle Buffet. In the retail release, the Battle Buffet is a quirky, one-room facility where you pay an entry fee and attempt to defeat as many trainers as possible while eating your way through a fancy meal. It's a fun diversion, but it's very limited. Most players visit it once or twice, realize it's essentially a one battle per table gimmick and never return. But according to development leaks and unused dialogue, there were once plans to turn the Battle Buffet into a much bigger, deeper system, the Battle Buffet Tournament Expansion. The expanded version would have been more than just a novelty dining experience. It was intended to be an actual competition, complete with rankings, seasonal events, special rewards, and a roster of unique AI challengers. The general idea was to combine the lighthearted food theme with a more traditional, replayable tournament structure, making the Battle Buffet something you could return to again and again throughout your journey. In the expanded format, the experience still began with you paying an entry fee, which would vary depending on your progress in the main story. But once inside, you would have multiple paths to choose from. Instead of being stuck in a single loop of battling whoever happened to be seated in front of you, the expanded version would let you select different buffet courses that determined the type of opponents and rewards you could expect. Casual dining was designed for early game players and featured weaker opponents, smaller rewards, and basic items such as berries or healing potions. Specialty course offered themed battles, such as trainers using only water-type teams or Pokémon that matched the dish they ordered, blending humor and creativity into the battles. Elite Feast focused on high-level opponents with competitive movesets, rewarding players with rare-held items like choice specs or life orbs. Finally, the Champions Banquet served as the ultimate challenge, unlocked only after becoming Alola's champion, and featured special guest challengers such as gym leaders from other regions or past champions visiting Alola. Unused trainer data supports the idea that at least a few of these guest challengers were designed. There is an unused trainer model for a young man in a Kalos-themed suit and another for a Sinnoh Ace trainer, suggesting that the Battle Buffet could have been a gathering place for international trainers. Perhaps the most ambitious element of the expansion was the ranking system. Players would start with a basic buffet pass, and each victory in the tournament would award points. Earning enough points would upgrade the pass to new tiers such as silver, gold, and platinum, unlocking tougher opponents and more extravagant rewards. Unused dialogue includes lines from staff members congratulating you on achieving top gourmet status, suggesting that the game would have recognized and celebrated your accomplishments. Battles themselves were intended to be more strategic than the final game's single-table format. In this expanded version, you would need to win a set number of battles in a row to advance through the courses of the meal. Each table represented a different stage of the meal: appetizer, main dish, dessert, and defeating the opponent at each would progress you forward. Losing a battle would end your run early, forcing you to start over. The further you made it, the better the prizes, with the final dessert table sometimes hosting a mystery opponent, which could have been a special NPC or, in rare cases, even a legendary Pokémon battle. The code also contains references to seasonal events, such as a festival menu and special seasonal dishes. These could have changed both the visual design of the Battle Buffet's interior and the types of Pokémon used by trainers during those times. Imagine entering during a winter festival and seeing the tables decorated with snow-themed linens and garlands. While every opponent used ice-type Pokémon, it would have made the place feel alive and dynamic. Rewards from the expanded Battle Buffet were also going to be more appealing. Instead of just receiving random food items, you could have won rare TMs, exclusive clothing items, or decorative trophies for your Festival Plaza home. Unused item data even includes entries for Buffet Trophy and Buffet Medal, which seem to have been tied to these competitions. So, why was this expansion cut? It was likely due to time constraints and resource allocation. Sun and Moon were already packed with experimental features, from the Pelago to the Festival Plaza to the Battle Royal Dome, and each of these demanded significant development time. The developers may have decided that the expanded Battle Buffet was less essential than these other systems. There's also the possibility that they didn't want to overcomplicate what was originally envisioned as a short, humorous diversion for players. The loss of the Battle Buffet tournament expansion is unfortunate, as it could have provided a rare combination of humor, competitive battling, and replayable content. It also could have helped make Howoli City feel like a vibrant hub, with trainers from across Alola and beyond gathering for these light-hearted yet challenging competitions. In the main games, there are few mid-tier challenges outside of dedicated battle facilities like the Battle Tree, so the expanded buffet could have filled that gap perfectly. In recent years, fans have imagined what the full version might have looked like, with some ROM hacks attempting to reconstruct it using the unused assets and text. The blend of a food theme with serious battles is something the series has never truly explored, and it still feels like a missed opportunity. If it had been included, the Battle Buffet tournament could have been a fan-favorite activity, rewarding creativity, skill, and persistence in equal measure. Among the many scrapped concepts hidden in Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon's development files, one of the most intriguing is the regional tournaments feature, a system that would have expanded Alola's competitive scene far beyond the main storyline. This feature was meant to take place after you became champion, serving as a sort of ongoing challenge where you traveled between the islands to compete in mini-leagues that each had their own unique rules, themes, and rewards. The premise was that the Alola Pokemon League, freshly established under your leadership as champion, wanted to bring a sense of friendly rivalry and community to each island. Instead of a single, centralized battle facility like the Battle Tree, these tournaments would be scattered across the region, encouraging exploration and giving players a reason to revisit familiar locations. Unused dialogue found in the game's files includes lines like, "The Melemele tournament is about to begin. Will the champion be joining us?" And the Ula Ula League welcomes all trainers brave enough to take on its icy gauntlet. These snippets suggest that each island's tournament was designed to reflect its unique geography and culture. Each of the four main islands, Melemele, Akala, Ula Ula, and Pony, would have hosted its own tournament. The Melemele tournament would have been held in Howoli City's beachfront arena, taking advantage of the island's sunny, festival-like atmosphere. This competition was meant to be beginner-friendly, with lower-level opponents, relaxed rules, and a focus on single battles. Akala's tournament, held near the Wella Volcano Park, would have leaned into double battles with an emphasis on fire-type strategies, making it a much more intense and fast-paced challenge. Ula Ula Island's tournament would have been the toughest, held in a snowy mountaintop stadium that, according to unused map data, may have been based on the summit of Mount Lanakila. Here, the rule set would have introduced unique battlefield conditions, such as permanent hail, forcing you to adapt your team to icy terrain. Finally, the Pony Island tournament was likely meant to be the endgame competition, a no-holds-barred, mixed-format challenge featuring high-level trainers from across all four islands, along with special guest characters who could appear under certain conditions. The structure of these tournaments would have been more complex than simply showing up and battling a few trainers. The leaks suggest a ranking and points system where you earned league credits for wins and lost points for defeats. Accumulating enough points in an island's tournament would earn you a trophy or medal specific to that location, displayed in a dedicated trophy case menu. Winning all 4 tournaments might have unlocked an exclusive battle against a hidden grand champion, possibly a cameo from a past Pokemon champion like Cynthia or Red. The variety of rule sets is one of the things that could have made the regional tournaments stand out. In addition to the single, double, and mixed formats, there are references in the game's code to monotype challenges, where both you and your opponents could only use Pokemon of a single type. There were also hints of themed teams, where opponents' Pokemon were linked to regional cuisine, folklore, or even weather patterns. These thematic elements could have made each tournament feel like a fresh and distinct experience rather than just another set of AI battles. One fascinating detail from the unused files is a set of dialogue lines from spectators that would have appeared during tournaments. These included cheers for specific moves, surprised reactions to critical hits, and encouragement if you were down to your last Pokemon. This suggests that the regional tournaments would have had more of a live event atmosphere, making them feel different from the standard battles in the main game. The reward system also showed promise. Beyond trophies and medals, there were item placeholders for things like rare evolution stones, exclusive clothing items with tournament logos, and even a champion's banner that might have been displayed in your home or festival plaza. In some cases, certain guest trainers might have given you special Pokemon as prizes for winning under specific conditions. For example, beating the Alola tournament without using any fire-type Pokemon might have rewarded you with a rare breeding-ready species. Why was such a feature cut? It's likely that time and resources were the deciding factors. Creating multiple fully featured tournaments with unique arenas, AI strategies, and reward systems would have been a major undertaking, especially given that Sun and Moon already had large-scale new features like the Island Trials, Battle Royal Dome, and Poképelago. Game Freak may have decided that the regional tournaments overlap too much with existing post-game facilities, or simply didn't fit with the pacing they wanted for Alola's endgame. The removal of the regional tournaments is a shame because it could have given Sun and Moon something the series has often lacked: a meaningful, varied post-game loop that rewards long-term play. It would have encouraged team experimentation, provided more in-world context for competitive battles, and added depth to the idea of Alola's League as a growing, evolving institution. Even without official inclusion, the concept has remained popular among fans. Some ROM hacks have tried to bring it to life, often using the battle tree's mechanics as a base, but adding new locations and rule sets. The idea of traveling between different battle hubs, each with its own personality and challenge, feels like a natural fit for a region as diverse as Alola. It's the kind of feature that could have easily been expanded further in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, or even in future Pokemon games looking to add more robust post-game content. During the development of Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon, Game Freak experimented with a feature that would have added an entirely new layer of depth to exploring the Alola region, the Pokemon Habitat Tracking System. This system, which was partially implemented in early builds but ultimately scrapped before release, was designed to give players real-time information about wild Pokemon movement and behavior patterns. It would have gone far beyond the static Pokédex location entries we see in the final games, making the world feel more alive and dynamic. At its core, the habitat tracking system would have allowed you to track how certain Pokemon moved between different areas depending on the time of day, weather, or even in-game seasonal events. For example, early test data shows migration patterns for Wingull and Pelipper, with notes indicating they would flock to certain coastal routes in the morning but disappear inland to rest during the afternoon. Similarly, Cutiefly and Ribombee were planned to migrate between flower-filled fields and denser forest routes, depending on how many days had passed in-game. The feature would have been accessible through an upgraded Pokefinder menu or via a dedicated tab in the Rotom Pokédex. When you selected a Pokemon species you had already encountered, a map overlay would display its most recent sightings in real time, along with arrows or dotted lines showing where it was headed next. If you arrived in the right place at the right time, you could encounter large groups of the Pokemon, sometimes with unique moves or abilities not normally found in standard encounters. This would have been the first time in the series where players could actually chase wild Pokemon across the map in a predictable, observable way. Some of the most interesting examples from the leaked development notes include migration events for rare Pokemon. There's mention of Bagon and Shelgon appearing in unusual cliffsides during certain weather conditions, and a note about Lapras showing up off the coast of Pony Island when the in-game clock hit a specific combination of day and hour. The files even reference Ultra Beast disturbances, special alerts in the habitat tracker that would notify you if one of the extra-dimensional Pokemon had appeared in the wild after an Ultra Wormhole event. To make the system feel more immersive, the developers planned for NPCs to reference recent Pokemon migrations. For instance, a fisherman on Melemele Island might remark that the Sharpedo are back early this year, hinting that an area had just been restocked with aggressive water types. These subtle hints were meant to encourage you to keep an eye on the habitat tracker and plan your hunts strategically. There were also ideas for using the habitat tracking system to trigger special battles or side quests. In one example, if you followed a herd of Tauros across multiple routes without being detected, you would eventually witness a rare territory challenge animation between two Tauros leaders, with the winner joining your team if you managed to defeat it in battle. Another test scenario involved following Comfey to a secluded flower grove, where they would drop rare healing items for the player to collect. In terms of presentation, early screenshots and concept art show the habitat tracker using a stylized map of Alola with small animated sprites representing each Pokemon species. These sprites would move in real time, and the game's weather and time of day filters would adjust the map's lighting accordingly. If it was nighttime in your game, the map would dim and certain nocturnal Pokemon icons would appear in glowing outlines, signaling their active status. Unfortunately, this ambitious system was likely cut due to performance and complexity concerns. The Nintendo 3DS hardware was already being pushed hard by Sun and Moon's upgraded graphics, larger world, and numerous new features. Running a background simulation for dozens of Pokemon species, while also tracking the player's location and dynamically updating the map, may have been too resource-intensive. There's also the possibility that the developers felt the mechanic would be too overwhelming for casual players, especially those already adjusting to Alola's many new systems. The loss of the habitat tracking system meant that Sun and Moon's wild Pokemon encounters remained static, much like in past games, while the Pokefinder and SOS battle mechanics still provided some variety. They lacked the sense of living ecosystems that the habitat tracker might have offered. In a way, This cut content was a glimpse at what a truly dynamic Pokemon world could look like, one where your journey isn't just about visiting static locations, but about observing and interacting with a changing environment. Even though the feature never made it into the final game, the concept has lived on in fan discussions and ROM hacks. Some fan-made projects have tried to replicate the habitat tracker using scripted encounter tables that change based on the in-game clock or weather, though none have been able to fully recreate the real-time migration paths hinted at in the development files. The idea of Pokemon moving around the world on their own schedules remains one of the most exciting possibilities for the series' future, and it's not hard to imagine it returning in a more advanced form if the hardware allows. With the habitat tracking system covered, that brings us to the final section of our journey through Sun and Moon's deleted content. In the outro, we'll reflect on what these scrapped features tell us about the game's development, the ambitions of its creators, and the ways in which even unseen ideas can shape the Pokemon experience. As we reach the end of our deep dive into Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon's deleted content, it's clear that the Alola games were far more ambitious in scope than the final versions suggest. Each cut feature, from the gym building quest to Survival Island, the expanded battle buffet, the regional tournaments, and the dynamic habitat tracking system, paints a picture of a development team that was experimenting with ways to make the Pokemon world richer, more immersive, and more replayable than ever before. In many ways, these scrapped ideas tell as much of a story as the features we actually got. Every removed mechanic hints at a version of Sun and Moon, where the Alola region felt more alive, where your journey continued in unexpected ways after the credits rolled, where NPCs reacted to your achievements, and where wild Pokemon behaved like living creatures instead of static encounters. It's easy to imagine a player spending hours hunting down migrating species, competing in themed island tournaments, or trying to conquer the harsh environment of Survival Island, all without touching the main story again. The reality, of course, is that game development is full of compromises, technical limitations, time constraints, and balancing concerns all play a role in determining what makes it into the final product. Many of these features may have been cut because they conflicted with Alola's core gameplay loop, or because they were simply too complex for the Nintendo 3DS hardware to handle. Yet even in their absence, the traces left behind, unused dialogue, test maps, incomplete models, give us a fascinating glimpse into what might have been. It's worth remembering that Sun and Moon were already some of the most experimental mainline Pokemon games ever made. They replaced traditional gyms with island trials, introduced the Battle Royale format, experimented with cinematic storytelling, and brought in mechanics like Z-moves that fundamentally changed battles. The fact that so many other ambitious systems were even considered speaks volumes about how boldly Game Freak was willing to rethink the series at the time. For fans, exploring this unseen content can feel like peeling back the curtain on a familiar stage, discovering the props and set pieces that were built but never used. Some of these ideas have been resurrected in later games. Dynamic Pokemon behaviors appeared in Sword and Shield. Expanded tournament structures showed up in Scarlet and Violet, and real-time ecosystem changes have become a more common feature in spin-offs. Others, like Survival Island or the Gym Building Quest, remain entirely unique to these early Alola builds and may never be seen in any official form. But that's part of what makes looking into this lost content so fascinating. It reminds us that every Pokemon game we play is the result of thousands of creative decisions, some of which we see, and some of which are left behind in the cutting room. In a way, these hidden ideas are like the rarest Pokemon of all. They exist just out of reach, leaving us to imagine what catching them might have felt like. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, think about those lost islands, those unbuilt gyms, and the Pokemon migrations we never got to follow. In some alternate version of Alola, they're all still there, waiting for a trainer brave enough to explore them.